Miss Linda, let me know if that helps. If it doesn't, we'll have to try something else. So, let's start in Leviticus 19. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to all the congregation of the people of Israel, and say to them, You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." Now, I want us to note from the very outset who this is directed to. Moses is told, you tell this to whom? The whole congregation. So everybody is the audience for these instructions. And it begins with a foundational statement, you shall be holy. For I, the Lord, your God, am holy. And the whole idea is we're supposed to reflect God. We're supposed to be like God. And so if God is holy, his argument is, you're my people, you need to be holy because I am holy. Every one of you shall revere his mother and father. You shall keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols or make for yourselves any gods of cast metal. I am the Lord your God. When you offer a sacrifice of peace offerings to the Lord, you shall offer it so that you may be accepted. It shall be eaten the same day you offer it, or on the day after, and anything left over until the third day shall be burned with fire. Listen, this is one I'm really good with. I hate leftovers. If we want to burn all the leftovers on the third day, that is a great law for me. But anyway, if it's eaten at all on the third day, it's tainted. It will not be accepted. Of course, this is a passage that becomes important because you realize that meat from the sacrifices that they kept and brought home, eating that meat was a participation in the sacrifice. That also explains an awful lot when you get into 1 Corinthians and the whole problem that was had with whether or not they could buy meat in the markets and eat it, because some of that meat had been sacrificed to the idols of Corinth, and they were concerned that that meant that they were taking and participating with those idols. This is where that all comes from. And so it's important that we understand and get that foundation. It makes a whole lot of sense when you get in 1 Corinthians and you hear that discussion, when you understand that their entire lives, this is what they've been taught. And this is how they've lived. And so that's the foundation for all that. If it's eaten at all on the third day, it's tainted, it will not be accepted, and everyone who eats it shall bear his iniquity, because he has profaned what is holy to the Lord, and that person shall be cut off from his people. Now, that's a rather strict response to simply eating something on the third day. But that's what he said. Why does he do that? Well, he does that because he wants the people to understand that these regulations are serious. And that there is a consequence when you ignore these regulations. Did the meat itself, the food itself, whatever was part of the offering that they would be eating, did it actually spoil between the second and third day? And the answer to that is no. The tainting of it had to do with disregarding and not respecting God. The tainting of it had to do with the relationship between them and God. And we need to understand that as well. We talk about the law a lot in terms of its physical nature, and there certainly were physical things that they did associated with the law, but listen, the law was still spiritual. And it was still supposed to be teaching them about themselves and their behavior and how they lived and what it meant to transgress. And this is kind of showing that. They're going to be cut off for something as simple as eating the meat from the sacrifices on the third day. Cut off and separated from the people. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge. Neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. Okay, there's two things we want to consider here. When it says that you don't reap it right up to its edge, it's actually saying that they were to leave a border around the field that they didn't harvest at all. This would be the border that you think of when people were traveling down the road, that they stopped and went into the fields to glean. And then it talked about the gleanings, which would have been the leftover bits in the areas that they did harvest, the stuff that fell to the ground, the stuff that was missed. He said, don't go back and clean that up either. You leave that. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. And so that refrain, I am the Lord your God, you got to go all the way back to that first statement. You shall be holy, for I am the Lord your God, or I, the Lord your God, am holy. So every time he says that refrain, he's drawing them back to this idea. And he's saying you're going to behave this way, and you need to behave this way because it's the way I behave. Does God show mercy to the poor and the sojourner? And the answer is yes. He made provisions for people who couldn't provide for themselves. He made provisions for people who were traveling through the land. They had to show hospitality to these people. They had to leave part of their fields unharvested so these people could get food if they needed it. They had to leave their grapes with actual fruit still on the vine, and anything that fell to the ground had to be left so that people traveling had something that they could collect and use, or so that the poor had something that they could use. You shall not steal. You shall not deal falsely. You shall not lie to one another. You shall not swear by my name falsely, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not oppress your neighbors, or your neighbor, or rob him. The wages of a hired worker shall not remain with you all night until morning. That is to say, if you hire somebody to work for you, you don't hold on to their money overnight and pay them the next day. You pay them the day that they work for you. You shall not curse the deaf, or put a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall fear the Lord your God. I am the Lord. You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. Now this is important because he actually makes it clear in this passage that it works both ways. You don't show partiality to the poor, nor do you show it to the great. In other words, when it comes to your dealings legally, what do? You act justly and fairly. You do what is right. You don't look at someone and say, oh, well, they're poor and life's hard, so I know this isn't the right thing, but let's do it anyway. He says, don't do that. Don't be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not stand up against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. You shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your cattle breed with a different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed, nor shall you wear a garment of cloth made of two kinds of material. If a man lies sexually with a woman who is a slave, assigned to another man, and not yet ransomed or given her freedom, a distinction shall be made. They shall not be put to death because she was not free. But he shall bring his compensation to the Lord, to the entrance of the tent of meeting, a ram for a guilt offering, and the priest shall make atonement for him with the ram and the guilt offering before the Lord for his sin that he has committed, and he shall be forgiven the sin that he has committed. Okay, it's still a sin, it's still wrong, but because of the lack of freedom in this relationship, what was the law's penalty for fornication or adultery? Stoning. And so in this particular case, because there was someone who had no choice, it was to be treated differently. But it was still a sin. And it was made clear that it was a sin. And there was great compensation that had to be made for this thing. But because there was someone who was not a willing participant, you didn't kill that person. When you come into the land and plant any kind of tree for food, then you shall regard its fruit as forbidden. 3 years it shall be forbidden to you. It must not be eaten. I don't know what the secret about 3 years is. I don't know why he put that in there. I just know that he did. Just like I don't understand why he said you can't plant two different kind of seed in the same field, and you can't wear a garment with two different kinds of fabric. I've read a lot of people that speculate as to reasons for these things, but I think that I get, at least in this context, get no explanation of that. It's just, this is what I want. This is how you remain holy. You're going to do this because I'm the Lord. This is very similar to the speech I used to get from my mom when I said, why? And she said, because I said so. It's essentially what God's saying here. I am the Lord. This is what I'm saying to you. The fourth year, all of its fruit shall be holy, an offering of praise to the Lord. So you actually don't get fruit for 4 years. The first 3 years, you do nothing with it. The fourth year, when the fruit really comes in, all that goes to God. But the fifth year, you may eat of its fruit, to increase its yield for you. I am the Lord your God. You shall not eat any flesh with the blood in it. You shall not interpret omens or tell fortunes. I'm becoming more and more convinced. I'm not completely convinced of this yet, but because of the connection that the Bible puts to life and blood, I'm beginning to be convinced that you shall not eat any flesh with its blood in it as a reference to not eating animals while they're still alive. Not as much as it is a prohibition against not fully cooking something, but a prohibition against just being beast-like. And just so you know, there are places in Africa, for instance, where they will take their cattle and slit the throat and pull the blood straight out while the cow's still sitting there screaming and start drinking it. People do that kind of stuff. It's not unheard of. He's wanting his people to be different than that. They're to be holy. And he says, don't do that. You shall not interpret omens or tell fortunes. You shall not round off the hair on your temples or mar the edges of your beard. And so they didn't trim their beard, and the little curly things that hang down on the traditional Jewish man's head, where he doesn't ever, that's where they get that from. They don't cut that portion of their hair, and they don't trim their beards. You shall not make any cuts on your body for the dead or tattoo yourselves. I am the Lord. Do not profane your daughter by making her a prostitute, lest the land fall into prostitution and the land become full of depravity. By the way, God just used a slippery slope argument. He said if people start making their daughters into prostitutes, then the whole land's going to fall into that kind of depravity. That's how sin works. You shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Do not turn to mediums or necromancers. Do not seek them out, and so make yourselves unclean by them. I am the Lord your God. You shall stand up before the gray head and honor the face of an old man, and you shall fear your God. I am the Lord. Show respect to your elders. When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you. Do you hear that? When you got this sojourner passing through your land, he says, you act toward them exactly like you act toward a native son. You shall do no wrong. Verse 35, you shall do no wrong in judgment, in measures of length or weight or quantity. You shall have just balances, just weights, a just ephah, and a just hin. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and you shall observe all my statutes and all my rules and do them. I am the Lord. Okay, so there's this whole chapter dedicated to telling them. I don't think this is intended to be an exhaustive list. In fact, I know it's not, because there's more things talked about before and after this chapter. But here this chapter sits as a picture of what someone who belongs to God is supposed to look like. And there's a lot of things talked about. And I don't know if you picked up on it or not, but as we read through the first part of this chapter, it's basically just running right down the Ten Commandments. It doesn't name them, but it gives the structure of those commandments through the things that it talks about there. Where I want to focus is on 3 verses in this text. Verses 17 and 18, and then verse 34. So let's look at those a little bit closer. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. Okay, who was the brother? Okay, yeah. Other Israelites. They were all brethren. They all had the same father. And that wasn't even all the way back to Abraham. They all had the same father, much closer than that. And that was who? Jacob, Israel. They were Israel. That's why they're called Israelites. They were all sons of Israel. And so anybody who was a son of Israel would have been classified as their brother. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. Now, do you notice that? He doesn't just say you shall not hate your brother. He says in your heart. Now, how does anybody know if you hate your brother in your heart? If you don't act on it, how does anybody know that? But the prohibition here is about what I feel in my heart. And so this is what I'm talking about. The law went down much deeper than we tend to act as though it did. We tend to act like it was treated, and by the way, there were those who treated it like a checklist, but that's not the way God gave it. God gave it going all the way down to what was inside of them, how they felt toward one another. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor. And I think that's an interesting juxtaposition there, because the suggestion is that if you don't reason frankly with someone, that the motivation is what? That you don't really care about them, that you don't love them. What's it mean to reason frankly? Somebody may be reading a different translation that may use different words there. Y'all can offer those words to help define the idea. But what does it mean to reason frankly? Okay. Right. I think there's an aspect of that. What else? What's the word frank mean? If someone walks up and says, "Can I be frank with you?" What are they saying? Yeah, to be straightforward, to be honest, to be candid, to be, what's the buzzword right now? We're going to be, we want government to be transparent. To be transparent. That's the current buzzword. That's what that word means. To offer candid, frank, obvious statements and information, so that everybody knows exactly. When you come in there with these ulterior motives and you're saying this, but you're really looking for this, that's not being frank. That's being deceptive. He says, look, just be frank with people. Tell them what you think, tell them how you feel, say it in a way that they understand it, and reason with them. So what's the word reason mean? Just so you know, the prophet Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 18, God wants all of us to do what? To reason with Him. So what does it mean to reason? Okay, to discuss. In the world that I was educated in, my minor was in communications, we would say to argue. As long as you don't misunderstand and use the colloquial definition of argue, which I define as word fighting. This is not word fighting. This is arguing like laying down your case, setting forth your reasons. There's a reason why they're called reasons. Setting forth your reasons for what you think and what your judgment is, and why you believe that this is your piece of territory, or why you believe that was wrong to do that, or why you believe, whatever the case may be. But to just be honest with people and say, this is what my problem is, this is why it's a problem, and also be reasonable, meaning what? That you listen to the other side and you realize that your judgment may in fact be what? It could be incorrect. It could be incorrect because you're just wrong. It could be incorrect because you lack understanding about something. It could be incorrect because you don't have certain information that changes the situation. Where would that information possibly come from? The other person you're talking to. It could be incorrect because you're biased. And if you listen as you frankly reason with someone as a reasonable individual, you may become aware of your bias and say, oh, wait a minute, I was looking at that wrong. So, you shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you
then that can help you not get below that area. So, speak your piece and then you must move on.
Right. And apparently I have to keep my hands out of my pockets because I keep turning the audio off. It should be back now, guys. So that's those two verses. Now let's look at verse 34. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you. Now, do you notice what we just read about how to treat your brother? He says you don't hate your brother in your heart. You reason frankly with your neighbor. You don't take vengeance. You don't bear a grudge against the sons of your own people. He's defining in those verses how to treat your fellows. And then he gets down to verse 34 and he says, you treat the stranger the same way you treat the native. Which means what? That you don't hate them in your heart. That you reason frankly with them. That you don't take vengeance. That you don't carry grudges. You shall love him as yourself. How can I love a stranger as I love myself? Okay. You want the best for them. Not just want the best for them. Maybe we ought to take that a step further. You make sure you don't do anything to prevent what is best for them. Or you take it as far as Christ did, and you make sure you do something to make possible the best for them. Now all of a sudden, the way in which I behave Maybe that'll hold out long enough to get new batteries. Okay, how far am I willing to take that?
A good example on that reason I asked. I mean, it's a true example. A friend of mine in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I mentioned this one many years ago in a lesson. He was a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
He met a stranger on the road. He gave him a ride, and as he was going, he didn't have any money to get there. He invited him home in his house. He fed him, gave him a bed to sleep in for the night, so the next day he would see about helping him towards his journey. That night, his bedroom door was broken into. He was awakened. He was beaten almost to death.
Yep.
He stole his car and left.
Yeah, I know of at least one situation where someone was literally beaten to death. And I know I had a family member that stopped to help somebody on the side of the road. All right. Hopefully this is going to last longer. We'll see. Apparently it was low batteries and not my hand, so that's a good thing. The first thing, I guess, that we should observe about that, the person who did stop, the person who does help, the person who pays a price for that, at least is doing what is right before God in that action. Are they getting treated properly in return? No. But they're doing what's right. Now, is it okay for us to use good judgment and to provide things for people without putting ourselves in harm's way? And the answer to that is yes. There are ways to do that. I've tried to do that at various times. And just one story I'll tell you. There was a fellow that called needing help, claiming to need help. I don't think he needed any help after this was all said and done. He wanted to come to my house and take a shower. He said he had a clean change of clothes. He was on his way to Dallas for a medical procedure to be done. And all he wanted was to come to my house and take a shower. And I went, there ain't no way in the world I'm bringing him to my house to take a shower. But I said, I got the phone number where he was at, and I said, I'll call you back in just a second. He was at a truck stop, gas station-like thing, right next door to a hotel in town. And I called down there and said, hey, this is who I am, and this is what the situation is, and I'm going to send him to you, and I'll come settle up the bill with you tomorrow. Luckily, it was a small town, and you could do that kind of stuff there. But anyway, I did, and went to settle up the bill tomorrow. They wouldn't let me pay, and they were just going to leave it at that at first. I kept insisting, and they said, well, the owner would have been willing to help anyway. But, long story short is, the guy showed up, but then he didn't actually ever go to the room, and he didn't actually use it, and he was kind of problematic, and so he didn't really want help. And I don't think that's what he was looking for when he called me. I think he was looking for a way to get into my house and probably to rob me or to harm my family, which is one of the reasons why I said that's not the route I'm going to go. I was willing, though, to pay money out of my pocket to provide him a place to have what he needed. I quite frankly, at the time, it wasn't a situation where I had a whole lot of extra money to do something like that, but I was still going to do it anyway. I was going to find something that I'd normally spent money on that I didn't spend money on at that time, so that I could do that for that person. There are ways to go around. I think that's part of the reason why the fields were left with food in them. People didn't have to go to somebody's house to get the food. People could just glean it for themselves. By the way, notice that the person who's getting the help, in this case the poor or the sojourner, in the gleaning situation, they're still being required to work for their food. They have to go out and harvest it. They have to process it. They have to deal with it. They have to make it useful. It wasn't a a handout. I know another situation. Somebody tried to provide some groceries for somebody, and the lady got mad and screamed at him and said, "You should take us to a restaurant and buy us a hot meal. I'm going to have to take this home and cook it." Well, I tried to help you, but I'm sorry I can't help you if that's your attitude. We can use the good sense that the Lord gave us to preserve and protect ourselves. But again, this is focused from the very outset on what's in our hearts and what we try and attempt to do. Are we always successful? Do people always accept what we're willing to do? I mean, I'll give you another quick example. I got hit up from a guy wanting some money in downtown Lafayette one time, and I wasn't far from a local cafe, and I said, "Well, I can't give you any money, but we can walk over here and I'll buy you a cup of coffee and a biscuit if you just need something to eat." He refused to do that. I'm pretty sure he wanted to go buy alcohol, but I can use my good sense to say that I'm not going to put myself in harm's way and try to find ways to assist people, even if it's nothing more than putting them in contact with other people in town that are set up to help in ways that I can't. A homeless shelter or the food bank or somebody that has something and a means to help that I can't, but I have the information and I can put them together, and I'm discharging the responsibility here to do what I can to help them and not turn blindly against them or look down upon them. And that's the other side of this. The way this is laid out, because it starts with don't hate your brother in your heart, it's suggesting that all of these other behaviors that it's talking about are behaviors that are motivated from that hate. And so if I'm dishonest with them, it's because I don't love them as I ought to. If I take vengeance against them, it's because I don't love them as I ought to. If I bear a grudge against them, it's because I don't love them as I ought to. And then it carries it all the way to the sojourner, to the person I don't know. If I'm mistreating them, it's because I don't love them the way that I ought to. As long as I don't lack love in my behavior, then I'm not failing to honor this system. Now, again, we're busting ground here. I'm actually going somewhere else. We're going to end up in the New Testament, but apparently we're not going to end up there tonight because I'm out of time according to the clock. I do want to read one thing, and I think this is a place that I'll remember and I can pick up again in this spot next time. This is a report given by Hillel the Elder, who lived from 110, around sometime either from the 1st century BCE to the very early days of the 1st century in what they say the Common Era nowadays. They don't say AD anymore. But anyway, he used this verse as a most important message of the Torah for his teachings. Okay, so he is a teacher, an elder, a Jewish elder. And he set forth that this verse is the most important verse in all of the Torah. And this is the story that goes along with it. He was challenged by a Gentile who asked him to be converted under the condition that the Torah be explained to him while he stood on one foot. So you can tell this is a test kind of deal where a guy walks up and says, "I'll tell you what, I'll listen to you if you can convert me by explaining everything in the Torah while I stand on one foot." And so this is what he said to him. Drawing from Leviticus 19:18, this is what he said. "What is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow." This is the whole Torah. The rest is explanation. Go and learn. And we're going to see that he may have been onto something. We're going to see that what's hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. It is pretty much what Jesus said. And we'll be talking about that next time. So think about that, and we'll talk about this more later. And I'm happy that I got the audio working for most of it.